Insider Lord Belgrave has some new things to talk about. We're going to be discussing Ripple, the hidden financial stack, and also another post. LIBOR scandal rocks the global banking system. Lord Belgrave claims to be a banking insider, ex-City London banker, now based in New York, been in XRP and Bitcoin since the early days, and he has been putting out a lot of information, and some of you guys really like to go over this stuff, so let's go ahead and dive into his latest posts. Here we go. Too many still reduce Ripple to payments. That is a profound misunderstanding. Ripple and the XRP ledger were structured deliberately for control across the entire stack of global finance and trade. The surface layer is visible. The deeper protocols are not. On the surface, RippleNet corridors, bridge asset functions of XRP, CBDC pilots with central banks, announcements of banking partnerships. This is what the public applauds, critiques, litigates. It is theater. Beneath the surface lies the distributed settlement infrastructure, also known as DSI, a consensus-driven, low-latency architecture for atomic settlement across jurisdictions. It is, in plain English, the skeleton of the next-generation real-time gross settlement framework, and it mirrors the XRP ledger. Institutional layer value, also known as IVL, builds on top. It routes liquidity across multiple currency corridors. It automates bilateral and multilateral contracts. It embeds compliance filters. It is RippleNet and ODL reframed in institutional lexicon. Think of this as the logic stack of capital markets themselves. The agreement language even speaks to the digital identity anchoring, also known as DIA, not digital asset. Oh, sorry, that was like digital asset investor. Identity tethered cryptographically to biometric and genomic vectors references the IMF, the World Economic Forum, the GLEIF frameworks appear in very definitions. This is where finance coverages where identity infrastructure. One step further, biological key infrastructure, BKI, genomic delivered cryptographic signatures, bio-linked remittance flows, genome anchored wallets. It reads more like a DARPA than Deutsche Bank, and yet the language exists inside multi-party banking NDAs. Then comes the EMLO layer, encrypted messaging and liquidity orchestration, ISO 20022 based messaging, real-time telemetry from liquidity providers, FX order books, automated sanctions screening, in effect, the replacement of SWIFT with a cryptographically audible layer. Remember, the entire world is moving to this new ISO standard. It's a messaging standard. RippleNet is ISO compliant, and yes, you can use XRP inside of that for instant settlement. At the summit, sovereign token instruments, also known as STIs, digitized treasuries, carbon futures, CBDCs, development bonds, all interoperable with the XRP ledger infrastructure and designed to transact on ledgers compliant with the same architecture. Remember, the XRP ledger was the first DEX, and so you can swap anything else of value on the XRP ledger, whether it's crypto, fiat, tokenized treasuries, carbon futures, all of these different things will be traded on the XRP ledger. This is the point. Ripple's visible functions will remain above the waterline, subject to both praise and criticism, which we get a lot of here in the crypto space. But the true protocols, DSI, IVL, DIA, BKI, ELMO, STIs will operate beneath it, quietly without fanfare through indirect channels. The result is not an alternative. It is the total financial stack. Base rails, DSI, institutional logic, IVL, digital identity, DIA and BKI, messaging plus liquidity, ELMO, and sovereign instruments, STIs. Ripple and the XRP ledger are not participants. They are the architecture of the entire financial system. I added the entire financial system here just so you are aware if you're listening in the car. This is just what I'm thinking in my head when I'm reading this. In tradition, banking terms, we call this bearing the lead. Everyone debates lawsuits and remittances. Meanwhile, the foundations for global financial control are being laid in definitions hidden with annexes of NDAs. This is why I left banking convinced the future will not be announced itself with fireworks. It will simply appear one morning, switched on, integrated, inescapable, and by then XRP will not be a speculative token. It will be the entire operating system. That's a bullish thread, man. That is a fun thread to go through. Let's take a look at what he's talking about with this LIBOR scandal. I'll never forget summer 2012. So we're switching to this new thing, okay? The entire city was buzzing. Barclays just had been fined for manipulating LIBOR, the very benchmark underpinning trillions in contracts. Some of us knew the truth. This wasn't a Barclays issue, it was a cartel problem. For context, LIBOR wasn't just an interest rate. It was the plumbing for global finance. Mortgages, derivatives, swaps, all priced off it. And then it collapsed because of the gentleman's club of banks had been submitting false rates for years. I sat in a meeting that week at Canary Wharf. A senior MD told us if the public knew how fragile the interbank system really is, they'd panic. The mood was grim. The old rails weren't just outdated, but they were compromised at its core. Around that time, a name started circulating quietly in innovation circles, OpenCoin, later renamed Ripple Labs. It sounded fringe, but I remember an internal email summarizing a paper on consensus-based ledgers for real-time gross settlement. It stuck with me. Think about the timing. While the LIBOR cartel was being dragged into daylight, a new ledger was launched in 2012. It's not a coincidence. Ripple wasn't built to compete with Bitcoin. It was built as an antidote to cartelized interbank system we had just watched implode. I am not used to saying that word. I do apologize. The parallels were uncanny. LIBOR rigging a small group of manipulating benchmarks in the dark, Ripple's vision, an immutable, transparent ledger where rates and liquidity could be audited in real time. The solution appeared the moment the disease was exposed. Here's what few understand. Barclays was one of the earliest backers of Ripple and the XRP ledger. So ask yourself, was Barclays' role in LIBOR manipulation merely reckless, or was it intentional? Did they take the fall to force LIBOR's death and accelerate adoption of the replacement system they were already invested in? So he's speculating here that Barclays was the one who took a lot of this fall for manipulating the LIBOR system. They were an early investor in Ripple and XRP, and maybe they were playing both sides here. If you were in the rooms, you'd know Barclays was hardly alone in rigging LIBOR, but it was Barclays that became the sacrificial lamb. Why? Because it had a hand in the next system and being the fall guy covered for global transition. That's why I've always believed XRP's story was never random. Its birth during the LIBOR scandal was a signal. Ripple was engineered right from inception as the neutral settlement layer to end the cartel era. Most retail investors still don't see it, but I watched the corruption firsthand. I watched a global benchmark collapse, and I watched Ripple emerge in the same moment, backed quietly by players who knew LIBOR's time was over. That's not a coincidence, that's design. It says, I share more of what I saw from the inside of these rooms in 2012, the timing, the players, and why XRP was always meant to replace the old benchmarks. And of course, end of it, I cannot share the actual scans of the decks and the minutes. It's too risky, and he thinks that if he shares some more of this stuff out in the open, that he will be caught. They will be able to figure out who is posting all of this stuff. Just to give you the full transparency here, there's no way that I or any of us can confirm who Lord Belgrave is. And so, when I listen to this, I'm weighing in both sides of this, right? I know that this person could be making some of this up, or this person was actually in these rooms and is actually giving us a look into what the history was behind the scenes with Ripple and these banks in early days. I believe that there are people out there like this, and if it's not him, it's somebody else. And this does sound like this was happening behind the scenes. So one hand, I'm skeptical. On the other hand, there's gonna be people like this that are going to start sharing more and more of their stories. And as they come out, we're all gonna be like, hey, we've heard a version of this before, right? Anyways, I'll leave this with you. I hope you enjoy your Sunday. Have a great week ahead. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's always a pleasure. If you get any value, you can like the video, you can share the video, you can leave a comment below. Thank you so much for being here. Aloha.